So protecting access to the vote is something that's so, so important to us. And I think that one of the things that has really come as a surprise, but is very to a lot of Americans and that is very visible now, is that all of the freedoms that we have, if they are not protected, held sacred, if we don't fight for them, can be rolled back. And what we essentially have are a series of policies and rules that people are trying to put in place to pick and choose who gets to vote, instead of voters getting to pick and choose who gets to lead them. And that's really the argument we're having in America right now.
Hey, welcome back, faithful politics listeners and watchers. I'm your political host, Will Wright, joined as always by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. What's going on, Josh?
What's going on, Will? Good to see you.
Right after I said that, I heard a dog bark, and I was like, that could not have been timed better. And you could have done a "who let the dogs out" joke, but you held back. So well done. Anyways, our guest today is Andrea Hailey. She is the CEO of Vote.org, one of the largest nonpartisan voter engagement organizations in the country. Under Andrea's leadership, Vote.org has helped millions of Americans register to vote, request mail-in ballots, find their polling places, and navigate an election system that can be pretty confusing. So we decided to bring Andrea on to help us kind of wade through some of those confusing issues, talk about registration and mail-in voting, to election laws, to voter IDs, to misinformation, to all kinds of stuff. So welcome to Faithful Politics, Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. So I have to ask, Vote.org is an organization I have heard of. It's an organization that I think I've even used to just try to help wade through some stuff. And I know I did not give a very good explanation of what it does, kind of the broad scope. So maybe that's a good place to start. What is Vote.org and what do you guys do?
At Vote.org, we are the nation's largest registration and get out the vote operation. So we help people from the moment that they want to learn how they can participate in elections, everything from registering to vote, to finding your polling location, to understanding the laws in every state about how you can participate. And we go ahead and alert people to the elections when early voting starts, that sort of thing, and keep talking to voters all the way through election day itself. So we build the tools and technology that a lot of people rely on to get their voting information.
Got it. So one particular reason that I am very excited to speak with you, and I think this will dovetail well into your focus on educating voters, is that recently there was a Supreme Court. I don't really want to say a decision or opinion, but there was something that happened at the Supreme Court that allowed a legal barrier for Trump's executive order on mail-in voting to be lifted. That's probably about as far as I feel comfortable explaining kind of what happened. So I'd love for you just to fill in the blanks for me and then explain exactly what the court decided and what does it actually mean, because I think there's probably a lot of misinformation going on out there currently about what that decision was.
Absolutely. And first I just want to say it is confusing. It's even confusing for us at Vote.org. And so because this isn't really a normal environment that we're operating in right now. Every state governs its own elections. And so that's what's part of what is making this confusing here, is that the president doesn't actually have authority to administer elections. States have the authority to administer their elections. But the Supreme Court did issue just a few days ago basically the administration had a small procedural win here, where the issue itself isn't really solved of whether the executive order is fully lawful or not. But it's really what the court said is that the timing of the lawsuit around the executive order was incorrect. So because of that, the judges, the lower court was overruled. And I think we're going to see this issue come back up and probably back up to the Supreme Court in the next week or two. What it is doing is causing a lot of confusion and chaos about mail-in voting in general. So I think this is something for people to be concerned about, to pay attention to, but it's also not something that is right now in every state. You can still vote by mail according to the laws of your state. So really, I think all of this really does for voters is underscore the need for people to make their plan to vote, to make it early, to pay attention to what is happening, and to make sure that they know how they're going to get through the process. So again, it's something to pay attention to, but it isn't something that should exhaust people out in general. Like people can still vote the way that according to the laws of their state.
Yeah. For somebody that might be listening to this and say they, this is the first time they're hearing about a Supreme Court decision that is favorable to the president on the issue of voting. Like, can you maybe just back up and take us kind of like what was the purpose and or the reason for the president even having to try to create an executive order that was going to affect our mail-in voting? I mean, in my mind, I get the sense that elections are fairly secure and fairly safe and free and fair. But the president, I think, had sort of a different idea. So I'd love for you just to kind of maybe set the stage for why there were a lot of eyes on this particular one. Like, what's the nexus of the executive order?
I think what we're starting to see, just to put context around things in general, is that there are two types of people. There are those that believe on both sides of the aisle in free and fair elections. And then there are those that believe in some other style of government, which is more authoritarian in nature. And so what the executive order seeks to do is really take control to some degree of elections and to consolidate power at the federal level in elections. And it's really important here that people realize that all 50 states have their own rules, and they administer their own elections. And if there is something that, like a piece of legislation that comes up that is federal legislation, that's something for Congress to take action on. There really isn't a role for the executive traditionally in elections and legally. And that's why this is getting sort of confusing for scholars. But what the executive order seeks to do is it's a few different things. It seeks to create basically a database where a DHS where they're trying to solve a problem that doesn't really exist, which is the idea that there are massive numbers of people voting who are not citizens, and it's just certainly not true. But this seeks to create a database that would then decide who can receive a ballot and who wouldn't receive a ballot, with the idea of potentially matching up, Social Security numbers or something like that against voter rolls. The issue here is that so far, database of this nature has actually just misidentified who's a citizen and who isn't a citizen. So it just creates more chaos and more confusion. And we're, 68, 67 days, somewhere around there, out from the election. That's a real problem. Early voting starts very, very soon in some states. People are already requesting their mail-in ballots, things like that. So this is certainly just sowing a lot of chaos and confusion into a situation that is it's unnecessary in nature.
Yeah, it's when I started to track Donald Trump's actions towards voting, kind of at the beginning of this year. Just through AI or whatever, having to send me an update of what he's doing. And it's very concerning from where I stand. And I'm not asking you to take a partisan position because I know the organization is nonpartisan. And yet, in the midst of that, though, the organization has a mission to protect free and fair voting. I'm assuming I haven't read your, charter, but I'm assuming that's a big part of it. To protect voting that's free and fair, and that everyone can go and access the voting. And one of the things you do is you litigate, right? Or you help, maybe you don't litigate, give me, correct me anything I'm saying wrong, but you help provide funding for litigation on issues that create problems for voting. And I guess my question is, as a nonpartisan organization, right, what does that mean when it comes to voting? And then what does it mean when like how do you look at, say, something that happens, say like the wet ink signature. I had no idea until I was looking at this interview, the wet ink signature, right, requirement that then would create like meaning you have to come and sign something instead of digital, like it has to be in person. And there was some, you made some efforts to combat that. Can you talk about what would, what counts as something that moves from not like nonpartisan to we got to deal with this because it's actually hitting it's crossed the threshold of this doesn't matter about partisan or not, it's just illegal or it's wrong or whatever?
It's an excellent question. I mean, you're absolutely right that at vote.org, our mission is to make sure that everyone in our democracy has a voice and that everyone can register to vote and has the information they need to show up at the ballot box. So protecting access to the vote is something that's so, so important to us. And I think that one of the things that has really come as a surprise, but is very, to a lot of Americans, and that is very visible now, is that all of the freedoms that we have, if they are not protected, held sacred, if we don't fight for them, can be rolled back. And what we essentially have are a series of policies and rules that people are trying to put in place to pick and choose who gets to vote, instead of voters getting to pick and choose who gets to lead them. And that's really the argument we're having in America right now. And it isn't, taking it out of the partisan framing for a moment. I believe that most Americans, over 80% of Americans, have this shared value system of wanting access to the ballot box, wanting to have their voice heard, and wanting to participate in elections, and not wanting a different style of government. So it becomes really challenging when you have people who try to identify with the party, but what they're really identifying with is authoritarianism, right? And trying to pick and choose voters. And so some of these laws can seem really wonky, and the decision of when to get involved and when to challenge them is something that's an ongoing conversation at vote.org all of the time. But with wet signatures, the lawsuits that that you referenced of vote.org's, one of the main things for us is we believe that every state should have online voter registration. You do almost everything online these days. So the ability to pick up your phone and go to vote.org, check your registration. Everybody should do that right now, by the way. Check your registration and make sure that it's, make sure that you're registered, and then get through the process without having to find a printer, print everything out, find a postage stamp, a pen and paper, envelope, send it your election official office. You shouldn't have to go through that process. We have the tools and technology in these modern days to do almost everything. You can buy a house, you can buy a car with a digital signature. You can do almost anything with a digital signature. So what we found is that mostly for young people, especially, in voting age, young is considered anywhere between 18 and 35 can be a young voter. Most people want to register, with a digital signature, and they want to register online, and they want to have online voter registration. That's just something that is easy and convenient for voters. And what we found is that some states actually who had, then Arkansas is a great case, they already had the ability to register online and to use digital signatures, and the state legislature actually rolled it back and created a new law and said, no, you need wet ink. Now, for us, that means that all the time and energy we put into building the tools that voters are using just went to waste. That we, that we now had to allocate more resources to getting people through the process in Arkansas, and we weren't allowed to use our technology to do it. And so that is the kind of case that we take on and that we fight, because we know that thousands of people will be less likely to make it through the process if all of a sudden you switch the rules and make them jump through hoops. Everybody knows that the more hoops you have to jump through, the more fallout you'll have from a process, and that was the intention. And so that's the kind of thing that we take on at vote.org and that we try to protect. In this country, we know how to get people through the process of voting if we want to. What we're lacking is the political will. That's what you see when you have long lines. We know how to open up more polling locations. When you see, people try to roll back the use of digital signatures, even though you use it in business all the time, all of a sudden it's not good enough for voter registration. That doesn't make any sense. That's really about taking a younger generation and trying to toss them out of the process. When you see things like a lack of early voting at all in states, people know that most Americans are out here working multiple jobs. They're trying to make ends meet. Things are less affordable than ever. And they need options about when they can participate in an election. If you shut down the number of days for early voting, you know that some people just won't be able to make it through the process. So what we are fighting for day in and day out is the ability to make it so that Americans don't have to jump through a million hoops just to vote for who's going to lead them.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, and I think it's very, very important, especially today. I think that people should be exercising their constitutional right, and I think that there is sort of a effort to make that difficult. And you could argue that effort has been sort of ongoing, especially kind of in the world we live in with faith and politics. There are sort of icons of the industry that like Paul Weyrich, for instance, who has publicly said, like, hey, it's better for Republicans if less people vote. so that there's like this sort of like, built-in strategy, so to speak. And one of the things I see a lot, especially currently, is this like, attack on voter ID, or maybe it's not really attack. It's like, that this push for voter ID. You hear phrases like, oh, people should always have to show a photo before they vote. But there's a lot of different ways I think that people vote, right? And like, I primarily vote through mail, just because I'm an introvert and I hate being around people. So that method works for me. And I can't remember though, like when and where I showed my ID. But I know I'm legally allowed to vote. So can you like just walk us through like what are some confusing voter ID issues that you see in the news where you're like, that's not true? Like people have to show their ID for this kind of thing.
Well, the whole argument is still predicated on the false notion that there are tons of people out here voting when they shouldn't be, right? Like, so we're starting off with trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. But once we're already there, if every state, for instance, if every state wants to mandate IDs, why not make IDs free? That could be another way to show they're actually trying to help people through the process instead of wash them out of the process. One of the big controversies also is that we have some states that don't allow college IDs to be used. Well, you're targeting the student population when you do that. Some of those same states allow for your hunting license to be enough. So your hunting license is enough, but your student ID isn't. Really, it's with all of this, you just have to look at who's being included in the process and who is being washed out of the process. People who are lower socioeconomic status tend to move a little bit more, and in that you have ID issues. The SAVE Act, which has been, introduced multiple times now, famously tries to require things like a passport. So, that's how many Americans have a passport right now. Do you know where your passport is? I don't. Well, actually, I have to think about that for a
I
second.
actually do
I actually
somehow,
do
but
know
anyway.
where my passport is. But again, it's adding extra expense as well. So I think that if we are going to have a serious conversation, then we need to have serious solutions for Americans to make it through the process. A serious solution would be a state legislature including it in their budget, to get IDs, if that was the intention of the law to begin with. So I think that, in some states like California and in Colorado, vote by mail is so easy. You're absolutely right that you're not required to, you're not presenting your ID when you're voting by mail in that way. And so, but states keep their own lists, they audit their own lists, they have their own voter rolls. And the election officials who are responsible for elections in states are usually your neighbors. It's somebody who is a part of the community and really cares about elections. And most people are showing up to work every day just trying to do their very, very best at a job that is getting more difficult every election cycle. So I have a lot of empathy and am so proud of all the election workers all across the country who have to address these issues. But I think the main thing is that all these states already have processes in place for verification of whose ballot is coming into the system.
Yeah, you mentioned hunting license, and it got me thinking that, like, are the sort of like identification requirements by the states like really that diverse, where one state is like, hey, you can go online and get a hunting license and that will be okay to show at the polling, but like, your actual driver's license like would not be okay? Like, that just seems weird to me. Like, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, driver's license will always work. The issue becomes what constitutes an ID. So if a high number, and that's the classic example of that is the college ID in college towns where they're trying to actually wash students out of the process. They'll say that your college ID isn't enough, and for many people going to school their freshman year, that's what they have, or that's what they have to present. And so that becomes a big issue. But you have to ask yourself, why would people take the time to pass a law that says you can't use college ID, especially if a hunting license and things like that are already acceptable? Now you're kind of trying to shape the electorate. And the thing is, all of this is at the heart of it shows a fundamental weakness. And again, it doesn't matter which party, Republican or Democrat. If you are trying to reshape the electorate, it means you've already lost in the marketplace of ideas. It means your ideas are not palatable, that people don't like them, and that they don't want to be governed in that way. So if you are having to focus all of your what people on both sides of the aisle could be doing is focusing all of their energy on how to serve people, to actually take servant leadership and really care about community, instead of spending so much time hiring lawyers, trying to shape policy that shapes people in or out of an election. How about just have some ideas that the American public wants to vote for?
That would require politicians to think beyond themselves, Andrea. And I don't think that's happening. This whole thing is so wild to me. How much, like, voting, number one, it's assumed by so many people. Like, I don't want to say assumed safe, because I know since the 2020 election and the whole big lie, this idea that it was stolen, and there's been a lot of controversy surrounding elections in America, and up until then, I basically thought they were, pretty secure, didn't have any problem with them. I'd hear people talking about cheating and wouldn't see, and people would tell me, oh, there's this huge problem. There's so many immigrants that are voting and so many illegal people that are voting. Don't you realize everything is It's just destroying our country. And I would just be told this without necessarily given any data to back it up or any evidence. And what my point in all this is, it creates this massive like controversy now around voting, and it seems like this thing's been stirred up to create a controversy around voting. And I'm not asking you to affirm what I'm saying, by the way, but it's been stirred up, in my opinion. And now we have all these things that, like for instance, the federal government going and getting all these roles, and then asking people to purge roles. And the whole point of this executive order that we've talked about at the beginning of our conversation was connected to these voting rolls. And I guess we're hearing about these federal databases. We're hearing about purging rolls. And now there's a question of the reliability. I think you even said earlier in the conversation, we're putting naturalized citizens at risk of losing their voting. We can't even, like, we're making mistakes with these rolls. Like, we're actually removing people that shouldn't be removed. Trying to find something like a ghost that's not there, or a small little thing, right? How many people? 10 people voted illegally, as if that's going to change like any kind of election result. I would love to hear like about these roles, what you guys like, how reliable is the data that we found? I know I kind of prefaced it so people are going to think it's not reliable, but I don't know if that's actually true. How reliable is the data? And what's happening with these roles that they're taking? Do we know why they're taking them? What's the express reason? What's going on? I mean, I just love to hear what you know about.
Um, yes. So I first of all, again, the states all keep their own voter rolls, and they are accurate. And states go through all sorts of procedures to clean the voter rolls. And some states are better actors than others and purge people who they should not be purging from the voter rolls. And we've seen a big effort in that this year. So I do recommend, again, that everyone check their registration, make sure that they are registered, and keep checking it until you cast your ballot this year. But the databases that are being created are, again, created with this idea that there are all these people voting who shouldn't be voting. We know that this is false. The measure of an election is not whether one person out of millions and millions of people who will vote this year shouldn't have voted. The measure is, did it change the outcome of an election? Do you have some number of people participating that changed an outcome? And the answer to that is no. We've had safe and secure elections across the United States. There is a method and it's a psychological method meant to have us question our own democracy and question whether our voice is really valuable and all of that. If you start to have doubts about whether or not your vote counts, then you are a society that anybody can do anything to, because you start to get exhausted out of the process. And I think that the tactic has been to accuse, say things that are not true about our elections as much as possible, and raise the question. Because another psychological attack can come on by just raising the question. Is it? I don't know. Is this secure? It's like, does your vote even matter? People do that as a way to try to separate you psychologically from your values, from your country, and from you speaking up and having your own voice. And so I think that is what we are seeing. But we have safely run elections. One of the things that is so important is that election workers are supported, that these offices have funding to run the elections the way that they need to. So if the same people who constantly are raising the question would think more about how to fund election offices, that would be something that would actually help. But I think that this is a sort of psychological war on the American public that's happening, and I think it's happening across both sides of the aisle. No matter who you are, what zip code you live in, what your background is, if you are an American, you should have the ability to pick and choose who leads you. And that's the question that we're really having. These databases, there is a run on the data. There are people who believe that through data, they can control and consolidate power. And I don't believe that that is correct. I believe that people have the power, and people use technology, and you may amass massive data sets, but at the end of the day, the heart and community is what makes movements. And that's what you see ahead of a midterm election or a presidential election, when people really care about what's going on in their lives. And so it is dangerous, this massive run on the data and collection of data to voter registration data that we're seeing. I think it's, you kind of wonder to what end are people wanting to use this, but the end is picking and choosing who can actually participate, so that people can either seek power or remain in power. And that's, I don't think this is a winning strategy at the end of the day. People are going to get agitated. The databases that have been used so far have really misidentified people, and in several states taken U.S. citizens off the voting rolls. So if we are not capable of that, high level matching at this moment, then you got to ask, what is the purpose of all of these efforts? Like, how does it help 60 days out from an election, and how do you increase turnout? And that should be what everyone is seeking, because it should be a shared common value that we all get to participate in our democracy.
So imagine somebody's watching this. They go on your website, they check their voter rolls, their voter registration. They're like, they delete, they type it in again because they got some sort of error, and they're like, okay, I've been kicked off the voter rolls. Like, what should that person do?
Well, if you do this early and you make your plan to vote early and you continuously check your registration, then you go ahead and you flag that you're not registered, and go ahead and register to vote. If you show up on election day and find that you're being told that that you're not registered, it really depends on what state you're in, but you can often cast a provisional ballot, and that becomes important. But having that plan ahead of time is the best thing. I'm sure my parents always told me, I always have a plan, right? And so just like anything else in life, voting is the same way, because if you catch it early, you have a remedy. If you catch it on election day, you still have a remedy, but you may have an argument later casting a provisional ballot, and then you may have an argument later about whether that vote actually gets counted or not. So check those, verify your registration early, and if you're not registered, go ahead and just sign yourself up and get registered.
Yeah, I want to ask you about just voter confidence, because when Robert Mueller wrote his Mueller report for the Russia investigation, he put something in there that to this day, like, I still think about, where he said Putin's ultimate plan, I'm paraphrasing, but Putin's ultimate goal is to undermine our confidence in the U.S. elections. He said that has sort of been top of mind for Putin, and one of the reasons that he interfered in the 2016 election. So, like, I'd love to know if there are like any sort of public polls that talk about like how voters feel, about sort of our elections. Because when I look at the election numbers, I mean, it just seems like folks really are coming out in force, election after election. And I mean, that's great. I think it's awesome, But yeah, so help kind of like, square that circle for me, about whether or not, like, anecdotally we hear that people, may not believe elections are safe and secure, yet the numbers sort of, tell a different story.
Yeah, I think the numbers speak for themselves. We hear a lot, talking heads are going to say a lot of different things between now and the election. but you could see voter confidence because I think people, I just watched the numbers of who's participating. The numbers, we just watched record numbers in many states in participation in the primaries. This year at vote.org, we've already registered over 300,000 voters. We have, I want to say, somewhere between 35 to 40% this year are 18-year-olds, which is really exciting. So a new generation is getting on-ramped into our democracy. And I believe that people understand that the best way to protect elections is to participate in them. It's what scares me is the idea that I could wake up one day and that spark, that excitement is gone from the American public. And that's similar to what happened in Russia when people stopped believing that their voice mattered or that their vote would be counted accurately. And so we haven't seen that here. It's not working. The American public is protecting their elections and they're voting and they are participating, and a younger generation is coming on board as well. So I believe that people are confident in their elections. I think people can see through the constant accusations. You can only tell a lie so long before people start to see that you're making it up. Like people, I believe more in I don't believe voters are stupid. I think voters are pretty savvy and they know people are trying to separate them from their right as Americans. And so I think that the confidence is high. I think most people want to remain a democracy. I think that and I think they're showing up. I think we are on track this year to have record turnout in the midterms. And I think that, that speaks for itself.
Yeah, that's really encouraging to hear that. And I do think that the more the merrier in terms of voting. Let's get everyone out there. And I want to connect this to my that thought to my question, because you said something earlier about basically, I'm paraphrasing, but hey, if you can't, once you lose in the marketplace of ideas, what do? You try to change the rules of the game, essentially. You try to make it, hey, here's how you become a voter. You change the rules of becoming a voter. You change who's voting, right? You restrict it. That's how, if you can't win through argumentation, if you can't win through policy, good policy, something that's actually serving the people, then you're going to win through manipulation. And that's when you're trying to change who can vote. Voter registration is a very clear sign that politicians realize that they're losing. They can't convince people of their policies. And thinking about this becoming a partisan weapon, the ballot box becoming a partisan weapon, um, this is very scary to me. And I know this has happened many, many times in the past. There's certainly, and even in the like our modern context in different countries, everyone like it seemed like at least democracy in post World War II was kind of like this poster child for what everyone should be. Hey, everyone be a democracy. I know we had communism and the fight there, right? But it was this massive like conflict of worldviews, and like seemed like democracy was winning. Right. And then now it seems like there's democratic backsliding everywhere. We've had people that have come up onto the show. And here's what's interesting I want to push into, because like you said both sides earlier do this. And I was thinking, I wonder, because right now I'm like, man, it certainly seems like the Republicans are all on trying to restrict everyone's voting. And yet, though, thinking about the gerrymandering, we have many people on this podcast or several, I should say, that have talked about the gerrymandering issue and how essentially Democrats and Republicans have all tried to gerrymander, and we're at like 90% non-competitive, and so like in these districts. And so, and like 90% of the districts in America are not competitive. Those are numbers that I've heard. And I'm like, how can you even have a free and fair election with gerrymandering? And I guess like what I'd love to hear your thoughts on with this is, how can we get back to a place where the basic rules of the game are known and they are complied with, and people compete on the strength of their ideas instead of on the force, using power and force. how do you see us? How can we get back to fairness on that level? And anything you have to say about gerrymandering, I'd really love to hear.
I would say that here's the good news is that most things that affect most Americans' lives are happening at the hyper local and local level. So gerrymandering is going, to affect you at the federal level, but when you're voting for a judge, or you're voting for your local sheriff, or you're voting for your mayor or your city council, those sorts of things are going to be the things that affect you, your friends, your neighbors, and you don't have to worry about gerrymandering in that sense and at the local level. So I would say really focus locally on what you can do, build, create, who can run for office, and take action in local community, because local communities doing that all over the country are going to make all the difference in the world. And then next, to address the larger issues, voting issues at the federal level, Congress needs to pass legislation. They need to get to work across the aisle and pass legislation that makes sense and protects access to vote and doesn't diminish people's voice. And I think that needs to be front and center as a shared American value. And then anyone who doesn't share that value needs to come out and just say it. They need to say it in plain speak and own it. And I think that organizations also need to make leaders own what they're really advocating or not advocating for. So we have a huge election coming up. We're going to have new members of Congress in just a little bit here, in 60 days or so. And on the other end of that, I think that we need to really take a look at comprehensive policy and what does it mean to protect American elections? What does it mean to pass legislation that works for everyone at the federal level is the next thing. And then, one of the big issues this election cycle, unfortunately, and so this is again why people need to pay attention to their plan and make their plan to vote, is that we have a Supreme Court decision that came in right in the middle of primaries and right before this midterm election that actually has changed some of the districts that people live in and said that it's okay to redraw maps. And so you may live in a different, especially if you're in southern states that have already started to respond to the Calais decision, you may be in a different district than you were before, and you need to look it up and go to the What's on My Ballot tool at vote.org and look up who's on your ballot and make sure that that you haven't been redistricted. But the institutions need to get to work doing their jobs to protect elections.
You mentioned the SAVE Act earlier. I'd love for you to unpack that. Like, what is the SAVE Act? What is its sort of intended function? And feel free to kind of provide any sort of commentary that would be useful for the audience to just better understand it. But I'm really curious on the president's been pushing this. So I don't know if it will ever be passed under this Congress. But if it did, is there enough time to really implement any of the provisions in the SAVE Act before the midterms?
No, there's not enough time to implement, something. The SAVE Act would radically change our elections and local election offices that are already often very stretched, do not have the ability to respond with only 60 days notice. You really, as a best practice, should not be changing things right before an election. But the SAVE Act is a piece of legislation that seeks, again, to address an issue that doesn't really exist. This is all around the idea of who can vote, who's included, and who can't. But essentially your ID would need to match your name, on your birth certificate. So for many women across the country, the SAVE Act would present new challenges as we're registering people to vote, because a good number of women, more conservative women than liberal women, quite frankly, change their last names And so if your last name doesn't match the name on your, birth certificate, then it's unclear all the processes you would need to jump through to still be able to cast your ballot. So it's a piece of legislation that, if enacted, which I don't think it will be, would sow more chaos and confusion. I think chaos and confusion is the point. So of lots of the efforts that we're seeing right now, and it is something. It's a wake up call again for people across both sides of the aisle to look at the intentionality of it. You're talking about something that would affect millions of people in one fell swoop. It would disproportionately affect women in one fell swoop. And it would affect Republicans and Democrats. This isn't just I wholly reject the partisan, framing in general of all of this. This is about whether or not we as a country want to have a democracy or not. Do we, and I don't think it is I think this is something that is not, people have been able to rework what they think, liberal or conservative means to address their own hunger for power. But it doesn't, traditionally, this is something that we have, that we should be able to agree on. And I think the civil rights movement has also become the heart now of the larger democracy movement. We all have to realize how interconnected we truly are, because these are the mechanisms of elections that are under attack. That's the thing that's under attack, whether it's mail-in voting, whether it's if women's last names need to match their birth certificates, or it's taking college IDs and saying that they're no longer valid, or we're really talking about how elections are run is under attack. Now, America is resilient, and we have been resilient in this, but that's what we're facing here.
Does Vote.org have a position on possible DHS agents at polling locations?
Yes, I mean, I would hope that the agencies like DHS are doing the very important work that they have to do. Being poll watchers in key states is not part of that work. So my hope as an American is that is an agency that is tasked with keeping us all safe, and I hope that they are doing that. My hope is that they're doing the things that DHS was actually created to do. We don't need federal poll watchers at election sites. The states that have been announced are more than capable of running their own elections. And I think, again, that is only something that can cause more confusion and fear. Going into communities like I think it was announced that Minnesota is one of the states, going into communities where already had a lot of fear and chaos that citizens have had to deal with. So I think that it's not I think that's a bad policy and a bad idea.
Yes, I agree with you. I want to play devil's advocate for a moment, and I want to think, okay, so what's wrong with getting, verifying citizenship on the front end, and what's wrong with really being strict, right? I mean, we want the votes to matter. We want, I could see the argument where someone would say, hey, it sounds like you want insecure elections. What's wrong with secure elections? We want insecure elections. We want people that can just get on there and show up the day of, and then you say, sure, I'm an American citizen. Believe me, I'm being sarcastic, right? But I'm saying that I could see someone looking at this, not just I know people that look at this and they think, well, you're trying to tell me, I am trying to make sure that my elections are secure. That's why I'm doing this. Because I care so much about this country and I care so much about these elections, I want to make sure that only U.S. citizens and, and even you could see people, they should be educated U.S. citizens. They should be that. You could see where people would start taking that and where it can become very problematic. and yet you can kind of see the arguments on both sides. We have to, we have to face the decisions that the electorate makes. Everyone in this country should understand that very clearly right now, that elections have consequences, and all of us have to swim in the same water. So then why should I let that? So maybe I should care about how that person's voting and whether or not they know enough to vote, or what. I'm just kind of saying, I'm trying to think out loud of the kinds of things I've heard and the kinds of arguments that might be existing in people's minds that are sitting there, and they hear this and they're resistant to what you're saying. Not they want free and secure elections. That's not what I'm saying. But they think, well, the only way to do that is a heavy hand. What's your response to that?
I think that is fair. We all want safe and secure elections. It just happens to be we already have them. So if you only believe an election was safe and secure when your person wins, you need to do a real gut check, because that's not what it means to have free and fair elections. Your person doesn't always win. What you want is the general consensus of your community on who should lead and who should, what policies should be enacted. But many states already have lots of rules and procedures for how to check and verify registrations. And it is already a federal crime carrying prison time and fines for lying about your citizenship and participating when you're not allowed to in a state. So we already have a series of robust rules. Most registrations, quite frankly, are coming also through DMVs and places like that, where they're already checking people's papers there to get their license, and verifying through many different forms of identification. And many states already flag if somebody brings in documents that are that show that they're not a citizen. So for the voter registration piece, they'll already flag it. States are constantly cleaning. They're matching against Social Security and death notices. The USPS has change of address data that people are checking against. I mean, again, we have 36 states that require voter ID of some sort. You have signature matching for mail-in ballots. You have, then you have provisional ballots that are cast if there is any sort of doubt, and then researched, and people go back and check the provisional ballots to see if that person's vote should be counted or not. So I would say that the big thing for people to know is they're just playing off of the people who are causing this chaos and confusion, or who are trying to profit off of it, are really just trying to profit off of Americans not knowing their full election system in every state, and then trying to make them feel insecure about it. But we've been holding free and fair elections for quite a while now, and I think that the states are capable of leading this work forward in the future as well.
With the upcoming midterm elections, I expect that there's going to be a lot of misinformation, a lot of AI generated content that will seem very believable, and I'd love to know how should people either protect themselves, or respond to misinformation with regards to voting.
I think we're going to have both misinformation, where people accidentally, transmit information that they didn't mean to be intentionally harmful, and disinformation, where there are people who intentionally do things. We, a couple of years ago, we became aware that in Flint, Michigan, for instance, Black voters were receiving text messages saying that you could vote after Election Day. We quickly countered that with truth and real information. No, you have to vote by Election Day and whatever time the polls closed there in Flint, and gave accurate information. So I think the antidote to misinformation and disinformation is truth. And that's what we try to uphold every day at vote.org. And I think that you have to, look at the sources, take a moment. We all get heated from time to time. If you're reading something, take a pause before sending it on to your neighbors or friends and really look at, where did this come from? Who benefits from this and who doesn't benefit from it? Really investigate and decide what those sources are going to be early for you. And like right now, while you're making your plan to vote, where are you going to get your election information from? Where are you going to get information about candidates from? Which news sources are you really going to trust? And can you block some time to go ahead and, just like if you were looking for anything else that was important to you in your life, like spend some time doing the research. But that's why vote.org remaining a nonpartisan site is so important to us, because we want every voter to be able to come to the platform and just get the information they need to make their own decisions about how they want to participate. But the antidote is truth and checking sources, and go ahead and pause and ask people, well, where did you see this? Go ahead and challenge what you see. Don't just take in everything that you see online, and correct people when you see something that is, incorrect, and use sources like vote.org that are here really just to be a resource for people.
Yeah, I really love that. And we really appreciate you coming and spending some time with us, Andrea. This is the last question. What's your hope? You have a horizon ahead of you. Where the organization is going, vote.org. And I'm just, where are we heading? What's next? And how can people get involved?
Well, thank you for that question. It's a wonderful question. I think where we're heading in the short term is right through these midterms. I think we are going to have high turnout. I'm excited for everyone. Once you register to vote, text 3 friends, get them to register to vote. Go vote together this year. Make it a community experience. Make it fun. We've talked about a lot of the hard stuff and some of the complicated stuff today, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be you getting your voting outfit on, getting your friends together, going out, host a democracy
My voting
dinner.
outfit.
Yeah. And you got to have your fit. And then host a democracy dinner, get together with everyone, talk about candidates, talk about sources, that of where you're getting your information on them, and make it community based, because the antidote to all of this nonsense is community action and community based work. And it's really one thing if I tell people to go vote. It's a whole nother thing if you go tell your best friend to go vote, and tell them why it's important to you. I think that's big. I think what I'm really excited about in the longer term moving forward is we're sitting at the intersection of democracy and technology. And so there are a lot of, things that you can choose to be afraid of in the future, or you could be excited about. And right now, I'm really excited to think through all with the advancing technology that we have at our fingertips, all of the different ways that we can reach voters with the information that we know they so sorely need. And I think in doing it at scale. And so that's what I'm really, really excited about. And I'm excited to look around and see all of the good people in every state who are leaning in to do this, work, and how we can support them. At vote.org, we have over 1,000 partners that use our technology and rely on us all the time to reach their own constituents or their own people. And so I'm excited to solidify more of those partnerships, and I'm excited to build infrastructure that we know people will need in upcoming elections. You can get involved by signing up for any of our newsletters at vote.org. You can get involved by becoming the vote captain of your own friends and family and area and community. Show up to those community meetings. That stuff really matters. And again, at the local level, get out there and make sure that your friends and neighbors are safe this year. Make sure they're making their plan early to vote. Go ahead and vote as early as you can in your state this year, and sit down and just really build out that plan. We would love for you to share your voting stories with us at vote.org. We'd love reposting people with their stickers and things like that. So send that our way. Of course, We have some of the lowest costs per vote in the country. So from getting people from registration all the way to the ballot box. So I would be remiss if I didn't remind everybody that we also run on small dollar donations. So help us to register more people this year and to make sure that all those 18-year-olds that are registering through us, that we're able to communicate with them every single day between now and the election to make sure they actually show up and participate.
I love that. Thank you so much, Andrea, for coming on, spending some time with us, sharing your expertise. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. To our viewers and our listeners, guys, thanks for joining us for another episode of Faithful Politics. Make sure you get out there and register and go vote. Do whatever you can to vote. And we need your vote. And until next time, guys, keep your conversations not right or left, but up.